Hi, this is Lana Lisa Williams Mendiola, aka Survival Woman, and I'm here in my little apartment in Central California. Yeah, and my voice is a little bit hoarse. And I'd like to read part of the first chapter of my newest book called Selah and the Prisoner. And it's the true love story of my husband Jose and I, and how we met inside a prison. But I don't write it from the first person I point of view. I write it from the third person point of view, he and she. And it's not quite on Earth either. It's like a planet similar to Earth, but different, and connected to my first Selah book called Selah of the Summit, which you can buy on Amazon for like $10, pretty cheap, right? And it has a nice blue cover and a pretty picture of the mountains and, well, of me on it, actually. I look dorky, but there I am. So I'm going to see how this goes. I think I have my reading glasses, yeah. And I'm going to grab my glasses. And it's on my computer. I don't have it written out on paper. Yep. Saving paper here. It's on my Apple laptop. So I'm afraid the screen is a little small, but you get the idea. Okay, so here I go. Yeah, not the most flattering picture of me ever. Okay, yeah. Selah stood before the prison gate again. It rose above pale desert sand, cold in the early hours. Its high twin walls of metal fence interlocked in diamond shapes with curled barbed wire and razors round along its top. The whole thing seemed like giant serpents entwined together endlessly with neither head nor tail. To her right, one of many lookout towers rose higher than the serpent walls, its glassy observation windows glinting yellow in the morning sun. Between the double walls around the gate, fatal electric currents sparked with light-infused motion detectors and other things Selah could only guess the purpose of. For 8 months, Selah had entered this desolate place, alone, a little scared, her name tag with its small whistle, her only physical protection. Already she had known that sorrow entered these gates and stayed through long, long years and months and empty days and hours. It was far, far easier to enter through the gate than ever to leave its serpent hold. Yet sometimes little birds flew in to check the mesquite plants along the walkway where Selah now paced quickly across the cold cement. The birds looked for nectar, flitting around in spirals as if dancing. Selah paused to watch 2 brown sparrows with greenish feathers. They looked back at her, perching on the fence before flying away, somehow untouched by the death and sorrow in the wire, bringing hope to all who saw them. Scrolling down. "Silly little bird," she called. She glanced at her watch and hurried toward the first of 9 smaller gates she must pass through before entering her classroom. Inside the waiting room, she clocked in and surrendered her see-through bag for inspection by the correctional officer, CO, on duty. She emptied her pockets and walked quickly through the metal detector, signed her name in the book, and skirted past the bubble, where later a receptionist would sit encased in bulletproof glass. Selah entered admin doors and walked down the long hallway with its cheerful yellow walls and shiny linoleum floors to the key depository where she collected her metal chain and keys. She passed through the big white gate with heavy bars, past Central Checkpoint with its dark glass outside and its many inside tech monitors, officers watching almost every corner of the prison, inside and out. She never saw her classroom on a monitor. She had heard that the camera inside it was disabled, just hanging in the ceiling's corner to make people feel nervous with the possibility they may be watched. What did it matter anyway? Selah had nothing to hide. As she walked down the main corridor past the other teachers' classrooms, the sun suddenly shone in from outside the blue yard door that was left open. She paused before unlocking her gray door with the big silver key on her keychain. Sunlight spread around her as if alive, like a bird lifting its wings to fly. What's happening? She wondered. There was no answer. She could hear. She blinked her eyes, hesitated a moment longer, then stepped inside the classroom and got it ready for the day. As usual, several students were already there. She barely noticed the one who sat nearest to her desk as she unlocked the back cupboard so that her inmate clerk could take out the big plastic box full of folders and the sign-in sheet. She walked past the silent student as she unlocked the file cabinet and took out a box of pencils, pink erasers, a few pens, and a stapler. After arranging notebooks, she pulled the telephone out of the top drawer and connected it to its cable. It was her only link to security if she needed help, except for a panic button on the wall that she had never tested. One of two COs who walked up and down the main corridor may or may not be outside her classroom in time of need. They had radios and handcuffs, but no weapons. The CDR, Correction Department Rehabilitation Officers, however, carried batons, pepper spray, non-lethal, and lethal guns on their big black utility belts. They dressed in green combat-style uniforms. The company COs wore only tan pants and shirts, and some inmates teased that they were just security guards. But Selah respected them. Once she had seen a CO walk a half-naked, barefoot prisoner down the main corridor, calling out, "Stand back against the wall." He pushed the handcuffed inmate toward R&R to face special punishment inside a single cell. The captive's long black hair hung wildly down his back like a lion's mane, and his face was bleeding from the fight that he had started. The CO, unsmiling, barely glanced towards Selah as she leaned against the wall. Across from Selah, a new inmate sat down on the floor, his back against the wall. He almost cried as he watched the spectacle, fear etched across his pale young face. He was maybe 18 years old, but seemed like a child who had just awoken from sleep to discover where he was, asking in his very soul, "How did my life come to this?" "Oh, Maker, help him," Selah prayed. "Help all who are lost here." Selah had worked in the prison only 8 months. She had no other experience with law enforcement. She took the job because she couldn't find one at a university, though she was well educated. Sometimes inmates would give Selah trouble by refusing to do an assignment. They hardly ever yelled at her or made her feel unsafe. This was a good company-run prison with clean rooms and tasty food made by inmates supervised in the well-organized kitchen. Selah sometimes took a free hot lunch tray and sat in the staff lounge to eat at the long table because she was tired of munching on fruit and health bars in her car. She had learned that the worst thing about prison was boredom, the long, long hours inmates face each day. They repeat a set schedule of sleeping, waking, eating, being watched and watching, waiting, sitting on a bunk while all personal items are searched and some things confiscated, dreaming, writing, drawing. Even she was captured by the institutional boredom in slow afternoons when she didn't teach. She waited with her inmate tutors for students who needed extra help. Days behind bars stretched into weeks for them, and months and years and decades, and sometimes an entire lifetime. Prisoners could not leave in search of change. They could not find love or family or dancing or shopping or driving a car or using a tech device or drinking coffee in a nice cafe. They could not even take a walk on grass and smell the sharp green pine trees of distant mountains. Selah knew that the deepest sorrow in the prison was the lack of love. In this she shared the prisoner's fate. Though she could drive home at the end of each long day, she did not feel free. She was broken as they were. She stopped staring at the phone atop the file cabinet, turned and said, "Good morning, students." Her voice sounded like music, like the meaning of her name. "Good morning," some of them replied. They wore blue jeans and light blue t-shirts with CDR prisoner written across in yellow letters. Selah wrote the date on the whiteboard and then sat down at her big brown wood desk. She unzipped her clear bag and took out reading glasses and pens. While her students got out their books and papers, she signed the last of the winter solstice cards she had given to all the staff members, though she had received very few cards in return. Why am I even here, she wondered. Of all the places to be stuck in, why a high desert prison? Why not the Golden City, the tree-lined mountains, or the ocean's edge? "It's time to turn in the essays," she announced, smiling bravely even when she did not feel like smiling. She stood up and held out her hand. The student at the end of the first row closest to her lifted his head and smiled back at her. He held out a batch of papers. Selah opened her eyes wider and slanted up her elvish eyebrows. She had not noticed how chocolate brown his eyes were beneath his black hair. His bright white teeth were shaped a little crooked like her own, and his black beard and mustache were neatly trimmed against his smooth brown skin. She took the papers from him and glanced at the penciled letters he had written along the top. "Keep safe." A feeling Selah had not felt for a long time slipped through her. She sat down suddenly in her chair and placed the papers on her desk. The general confusion of more students arriving and getting out their homework hid the look in Selah's eyes as she opened a winter solstice greeting card that was hidden between two pages of lined writing paper. The greeting card was old-fashioned, a man and woman bundled up in a horse-drawn sleigh. They leaned together in red and yellow colors, smiling as the horse pulled them down a snowy country lane framed by evergreens. In red printed letters it said, "Each solstice with you, dear, is better than the ones before, and I love you more and more." Selah could not help but smile. How strange and unexpected. It was the kind of card a man would give his wife of many years, but somehow it did not feel out of place in her hands. It felt oddly comforting in the bare and lonely world she tried unwillingly to live in. Selah opened it to read the handwritten note inside. "Don't be sad, beautiful woman. Don't feel unloved. The Maker loves you, and so do I." She looked up sideways. The students closest to her desk was still watching her, their eyes locked together for a moment in that most unlikely place. You can be walking down the same long hallway you have trod for years. Then one day you turn the corner and everything changes. The words of another Selah story filled Selah's mind. She kept her well-marked Selah of the Summit book at home on her bedside table. Many times she had read it late at night when she could not sleep, her finger turning each page made of soft paper, bending down corners in favorite parts, wishing she could live such a travel, adventure, love story, quest for freedom from desert to the tops of mountains. She kept looking at the student. She could not even remember his name. He was new to her class. He looked back at her, unflinching, the pupils and corneas of their eyes locked together again, brown with blue. Somehow they imprinted on each other, like baby birds follow what they first see when breaking free of eggshells, like wolves who cry to the moon together and mate for a lifetime. The teacher and the students smiled. Sunlight from the hallway slipped under the heavy classroom door and barred prison windows. Selah never thought to surrender her student's gift to a CO. Company policy declared that she must. The company rule was don't get personally involved. She did not think about the rule. She just accepted the solstice card like one accepts a calling from the maker. When she looked away from the student's gaze, she read his name at the bottom of his note, Diego de Leon. Selah traced the penciled letters with her finger as if they were a treasure map. She blinked, not sure if she was imagining everything around her, and slipped the card inside her notebook. Then she stood up and began the writing class. The hardest part of any story is the beginning, she said. There were 12 male students in her morning class, ranging in age from 18 to 64 at each long table. At least 6 independent college student inmates worked at the back wall tech monitors. Selah looked at all of them as she stood in front at the first table, her back to the whiteboard and filing cabinet. Even the beginning of a beautiful love story is difficult, she continued. The beginning must lead to a change, and change is never easy. I'm going to show you a video about this, to go with what you read in the book. A movie, yeah, one of the students yelled. Can we watch it now? Another asked. Diego de Leon had never given Selah any trouble. He was quiet, always early to class, and happy to help the student next to him. The only time she remembered talking to him was about the maker, informally during break one morning. The maker speaks to me, De Leon had stated. Selah, surprised, looked up at him. He has to speak in me and hear, he added. That's interesting, she had replied, curious about his confidence. I read the scroll, she added, smiling. In those living words, the maker speaks to me also. They were happy in their conversation, feeling somehow comfortable, as if they had just walked into their living room together, took off their shoes, and sat together on a couch with a cup of warm cocoa in their hands. Neither of them knew that their little encounter was a step toward their whole lives changing. Selah was brought back to the present by the faces of her students who waited for her to start the video. Our story comes from a book about a woman who misjudged a man. She was prejudiced against him. Before even speaking to him, she decided he was proud. He had a lot of money and a big, fine country house with servants. But really, he was merely shy. She thought she would never talk to him, but she fell in love with him, too proud to admit it to herself until the end of the story. One night, they could not sleep. After finally admitting their love to each other, they wandered in the early morning mist near a river and some trees on an island country far from here in a time long gone. Selah could not stop looking at De Leon. He smiled at her again, and she did the same. The man and woman met in that misty morning, and they realized they had both misjudged each other, and they embraced and, she hesitated, kissed each other, and they knew they would become a family and make a home together. All her students stared at her, listening to her words. She sat down at her desk and turned on the movie. Its color filled the white prison wall beside her with images and the voices of characters in old-style clothes. Had De Leon come into her grayish life like the hero in a romantic novel? Micah saved Selah of the summit from a desert prison in that famous old story treasured in the book that Selah kept beside her bed. Her mother named her after that Selah, whom she called Selah I, long ago in a desert keep where Selah was a slave to Master Regan. A traveler named Micah appeared at a banquet where she served the wine. He wore a green hooded cape that almost hid his face. When Selah least expected something, He gave her a snowflake that would never melt. Later that night, Micah led her through the prison wall and toward the distant mountains. That was Selah of the summit, not the desert. Was Selah's story repeating now, 1,000 years later, similar but different? Was the dark-haired prisoner who sat close to her another type of Micah? Could she be Selah too? That's it. Chapter 1. Hope you liked it. Yeah. Oh gosh. And I hope you are having a good day. Thanks for reading. Thanks for watching. And you can find this rest of Selah and the Prisoner on Amazon. It's a Kindle Vella book, which means it's published chapter by chapter, like the old-fashioned novellas of the 1800s, where authors like Dickens, Charles Dickens would write long books, one chapter at a time, and publish one chapter in the newspaper, and then the next week, the next chapter. And so people would have to buy the newspaper to read what happened next. And where the term cliffhanger was started, because at the end of a chapter, literally one of the main character could be hanging from a cliff, and you had to buy the newspaper the next week to see what happened. Did the main character survive hanging on that cliff? So maybe this is a little cliffhanger to see what's going to happen next with Selah and Micah in the prison in the desert. Thanks for listening, and buy my book, Selah and the Prisoner, Kindle Vella. You just have to look for Lana Lisa Williams. That's my writing name, Lonna Lana Lisa Williams, Lonna, like Donna with an L. That's my writing name, and you can find me if you do an author search. Bye.